Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The night Damon told me he was leaving, 3 suitcases stood in our hallway like soldiers waiting for orders. He was by the living room window when I walked in, hands in his pockets, staring out at the street. He did not turn when he said we needed to talk. I set my purse on the console table and waited. My heart was beating hard, but my hands were steady. They had been steady for almost 2 years, through the late nights he called client dinners, the hotel receipts that did not match his stories, the unfamiliar cologne, and the way he guarded his phone like it held a second heartbeat. When he finally faced me, his expression was flatter than I expected. "I'm leaving," Damon said. "I'm going back to Simone." He said her name like he had been carrying it in his mouth for years. Simone Harrison, his college girlfriend. The woman whose old photographs I found in a garage box our second year of marriage. The woman whose profile he still searched when he thought I was asleep. "I see," I said. He looked disappointed by my calm. I think he had prepared himself for tears, pleading, maybe rage. Instead, I stood there in my green blouse and black slacks and watched him like he was a man I had already buried. "That's it?" he asked. "That's all you have to say?" I asked him what he wanted me to say. He dragged a hand over his face and said the cruelest thing he had ever said to me. He said he had never really loved me. He said he thought he could learn to. He said Simone was the one who had always mattered. 10 years of marriage, and that was the speech he chose. I thought of our wedding in downtown Houston, the way I believed I was stepping into a life built on loyalty. I thought of every business dinner I hosted, every pitch deck I proofread, every dream I had put on pause because he promised we were building something together. I did not cry. I asked one question instead. "How long?" He looked away before he answered. 3 years, he said. I nodded once. I had suspected an affair for 2 years. I had proof for 18 months. Hearing the number still felt like glass sliding under my skin. Damon told me he had already moved most of his things. The last 3 suitcases were all that remained, he said, and Simone was waiting for him. He put a folder on the coffee table and said Gerald Price, his lawyer, had drafted something simple and fair. He said we could split everything 50-50. He even had the nerve to say I could keep the house if I bought out his share. I did not touch the folder. I told him my lawyer would review it. That caught his attention. He asked what lawyer. I said he would find out soon enough. He stared at me, trying to decide whether my calm meant shock or surrender. He still did not know me well enough to read the difference. He said he and Simone were finally moving into a place together, a fresh start. What he did not know was that I already had the deed records for that fresh start. A midtown condominium he had quietly purchased in Simone's name with money pulled from our joint savings and an account fed by bonuses he told me were delayed. I knew about the furniture deliveries too. "You should take the last suitcase now," I told him. "There's no reason to come back tomorrow." Something in my voice made him hesitate, but he took it. He said I was taking everything surprisingly well. I asked if he thought I was supposed to beg. The truth was that an earlier version of me might have begged. The woman I had been the first time I found lipstick on one of his shirts and convinced myself it came from a networking event. The woman I had been when I saw the same number on his phone bill night after night and still told myself not to panic. But that woman had died slowly over 2 years of silence, research, grief, and planning. I walked his last suitcase to the door and told him I hoped he had chosen carefully. The words were not dramatic. They were empty. That unsettled him more than any scream could have. He loaded his car in 2 trips. I watched from the same window where he had waited for me. When his taillights disappeared, I stood still for one long breath. Then I turned and went to my home office. Damon liked to call that room my little hobby space, which told you almost everything about how our marriage had changed. It was where I once planned to finish my master's degree, where I later built spreadsheets for his business because he trusted my eye for detail, but never respected it enough to call it skill. My laptop was already open. On the screen was the file that had carried me through the last 18 months. Dates, transfers, hotel stays, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases, screenshots, copies of deeds, timelines, and notes cross-referenced to source documents. My best friend, Yvette Lawson, had helped me organize it. Yvette was a senior litigation paralegal, not a detective, and she never pretended otherwise. When the evidence moved beyond receipts and statements, Diane Morrison, the lawyer I hired in secret, brought in a licensed private investigator and later a forensic accountant. I did not want a fantasy case. I wanted something that would survive scrutiny in a real Harris County courtroom. Over time, the picture sharpened. Damon had not just been unfaithful. He had been strategic. He used marital funds to pay Simone's rent, cover her credit card debt, furnish the condo, make car payments on a vehicle registered in her name, and finance weekends he described to me as investor travel. The most painful evidence was not even financial. 6 months earlier, Damon called me while driving home. He thought he had disconnected, but the line stayed open. I heard Simone in the car with him. I heard her ask how much longer he planned to play house with me. I heard him say, "Not much longer. Taryn keeps everything stable. The investors trust me because she makes our life look solid, and her money is still helping this quarter. Once my options vest, I'm done pretending." Then Simone asked whether I suspected anything. Damon laughed and said, "She suspects enough to be careful, not enough to leave. She's loyal. That's what makes this easy." I had played that file exactly 3 times. The first time, I vomited. The second time, I cried until dawn. The third time, I stopped believing love could save what he had already chosen to destroy. Yvette texted me 10 minutes after Damon left. I answered with one word. "Gone." She called immediately, her voice gentle and practical. She reminded me to keep the backup drive close and every original document safe. She reminded me Diane would file in the morning, and that Cedric Boone, Diane's investigator, had already photographed the remaining contents of the house earlier that week, so there would be no argument later about what Damon had taken or left behind. After we hung up, I walked through the rooms one more time. The kitchen where I cooked while my own graduate applications sat unfinished in a drawer. The dining room where I hosted his clients and laughed at stories I had heard 3 times before because Damon liked how polished we looked together. The bedroom where he had slept beside me while buying another woman furniture. In the closet, I pulled out the red dress he once said was too bold, the blue suit I bought for a conference I never attended because his company needed me that weekend, and the sketchbooks I had hidden behind winter clothes because I had started to feel embarrassed by wanting anything of my own. Damon did not simply betray me with another woman. He trained me to shrink while he borrowed my steadiness, my labor, my inheritance, my patience, and my image. In public, he was attentive and ambitious. In private, he made little edits to me year after year. The red dress was too much. Graduate school could wait. The company needed all our focus now. Later never arrived. He let me invest money from my grandmother's trust into Fletcher Technologies because we were supposedly a team. I believed that. I sat beside him at early pitch meetings, helped him refine presentations, caught mistakes in contracts, and stayed up with him before financing rounds. When payroll came up short, I lent the company money without hesitation because it was our future. Damon used to say no one believed in him the way I did. It turns out belief is easy to exploit when the person giving it assumes she is safe. I packed 1 suitcase for myself that night. Documents, jewelry from my grandmother, hard drives, my passport, a few changes of clothes. Then I set my wedding album on a shelf because I was done carrying things that belonged to a version of me I no longer needed to protect. Yvette came by close to midnight with takeout and coffee strong enough to strip paint. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Damon had kissed my cheek that morning in one of those perfunctory gestures that had long since replaced tenderness. She asked how I was really doing. I told her I felt like I had been holding my breath for 2 years and could finally exhale. The fuller truth was uglier. When I first realized Damon was probably cheating, I spent an entire weekend on Yvette's sofa shaking so hard I could not keep water down. I kept asking what Simone had that I did not. I kept making lists of what I could fix about myself. Then Monday came and I understood something terrible. If I confronted him without proof, he would lie, reposition assets, and paint me as unstable. So I chose patience over drama. I chose preparation over hope. Cedric began lawful surveillance weeks later. Diane showed me how to preserve statements. Yvette helped me create a chronology that could withstand cross-examination. It was the hardest discipline of my life. We worked until after 3 a.m. that night Damon left. We separated my premarital property from marital property and reviewed photos of the house contents. At dawn, we loaded my essentials into my car and drove to Yvette's townhouse in West University Place. I had already arranged to stay in her guest room. The movers were booked, but they were not coming for everything. They were coming only after Diane obtained temporary orders and after Cedric documented the home again, because I was not about to let Damon say I stripped a jointly owned house out of spite. By 9 that morning, Diane called. She filed the divorce petition, the request for temporary injunctive relief, and a motion to preserve assets. She did not promise miracles in hours. She promised process. Damon would be served that day, and we would likely get a hearing within several days because the transfer pattern and condo purchase raised serious concerns. That was believable. It also meant the next phase would be public enough to hurt. The first text from Damon arrived just after lunch from a number I did not recognize. "What did you do?" Then came 4 more. "We need to talk. Call me now. This is insane. Do not make this ugly." I deleted every one of them. He sent an email too, saying we could still handle things privately, that lawyers were making everything worse, that he had never wanted to hurt me like this. I forwarded it to Diane. By late afternoon, Gerald called, sounding strained. He asked whether I would consider standing down on the emergency orders if Damon agreed not to move money. Diane returned that call for me. That evening, Patricia Fletcher, Damon's mother, called me herself. I almost did not answer, but Patricia had loved me honestly for 10 years, and I knew the difference. She was crying before she finished my name. She said she had heard enough from Damon to understand the outline and enough from Diane's office to know it was worse than that. Then she said something I never forgot. "I should have said more years ago," she told me. "I knew he never closed that chapter the way he claimed, and I wanted to believe marriage would mature him. I was wrong." She did not call it a mistake. She called it deception. She said if the truth required a statement from her, she would give one. Nicole, Damon's younger sister, sent a shorter message that night. She said there had been times Damon asked her to cover for him, and she regretted not telling me sooner. Meanwhile, Trevor Banks, Damon's business partner, reached out through Diane rather than directly to me. Trevor knew I had a real ownership interest in the company because my trust money had been invested formally, not informally. He also knew I had occasionally sat in investor briefings and reviewed decks in the early years. That mattered later. Damon's betrayal was not only personal. It was built partly on resources I helped provide. Our first hearing took place the following Thursday in a quiet Harris County courtroom. I wore a blue suit, tied my hair back, and kept my hands folded until Diane nudged a yellow pad toward me and told me to take notes if I needed to stay focused. Judge Lenora Whitfield was measured from the start. She did not humiliate Damon. She listened. Diane asked for temporary orders preserving all marital assets, prohibiting further transfers, and granting me temporary exclusive use of the house because Damon had already moved out and because the home contained documented separate property belonging to me and my late grandmother's estate. Gerald argued that the freeze was too broad and that Damon needed access for living expenses and legal fees. Diane did not overreach. She agreed there could be a structured allowance subject to accounting, then laid out the facts: the condo down payment, the transfers to Simone, the furniture purchases, and the timing of the withdrawals after Damon began openly planning his departure. Howard Bell, our forensic accountant, testified briefly about his preliminary findings. He had traced roughly $402,000 in direct payments, transfers, and identifiable affair-related expenses, with additional categories still under review. Judge Whitfield granted temporary restraints, ordered detailed accountings, barred either of us from selling or encumbering property, and awarded me temporary exclusive occupancy of the house pending final division. She also set a supervised retrieval process for Damon's remaining belongings. Only after that order was signed did I change the locks. Outside the courtroom there was no circus, just lawyers, clerks, and a few people from our overlapping business circle who pretended not to stare. Still, word spread quickly through Houston's tech and investor community. Damon worked too visibly, and too many people knew me as the wife who hosted dinners and sat quietly at fundraisers. What broke me open again was not the first hearing. It was the discovery review the following week. Diane, Howard, Yvette, and I sat around a conference table while Howard walked us through the deeper numbers. The first figure, he explained, reflected direct cash transfers and clearly tagged expenses. The larger number would capture the condo down payment, the furniture, a luxury car lease later converted to a purchase, rent support, hotel stays, airfare, jewelry, and repeated payments toward debts in Simone's name. Then Diane opened a printed email chain produced through Discovery. Damon had sent it from his personal account to Simone 8 months earlier. He attached a floor plan for the condo and wrote, "Hold tight a little longer. Once the stock grant hits and Taryn's tuition account stops getting our extra cash, I'll be clear. She'll be devastated, but she'll land on her feet. She always does. My tuition account, 3 years earlier, Damon and I had agreed I would finally return for my master's degree after the next product cycle settled down. We even created a separate savings bucket for it. I had been contributing from my salary and a small design contract on the side. The forensic review showed Damon had quietly drained that account across 10 months to help furnish Simone's condo and cover her debt consolidation payments. He had not only betrayed my marriage, he had financed another woman by emptying the future he kept promising to me. Diane did not ask me to calm down. She said, "This is the kind of evidence that changes equitable distribution." She was right. The emotional injury mattered to me. The financial mechanism mattered to court. Later that afternoon, Trevor met me in person at Diane's office. He brought company records I had a right to review. He also brought hard truth. Damon had hidden side compensation, mischaracterized certain reimbursements, and resisted board-level transparency whenever questions got too close to his personal finances. Trevor said he had been uneasy for more than a year, but did not yet have grounds to force a confrontation. He explained the conduct provision in the partnership agreement, the process for a temporary leave, and the steps the board could take if Damon's behavior threatened financing or client retention. Nothing happened overnight. There were notices, meetings, counsel, and votes. Real things, not magic tricks. Damon got through to me once during that middle stretch by using an office line I did not recognize. He started with remorse and moved to self-interest in less than 2 minutes. He said he was sorry. He said he had been confused. Then he got to the point. Trevor and the board were discussing a forced buyout, and he needed me to make that stop. He reminded me that my money was tied up in the company too, that we had once built that business together, that I knew how much it meant to him. I asked him one question. If none of this had been discovered, would he still be leaving me after the stock vested? There was a long silence. Then he said that was not fair. That answer was enough. I told him the board's decisions were not mine to control, and that my concern was protecting my legal interests, not rescuing his position. He said I was punishing him. I told him I was finally refusing to subsidize him. His voice hardened for a second, and there he was again, the man who had spent years treating my softness like an entitlement. He said I was throwing away a decade. I told him he had thrown it away in pieces, and I ended the call. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on Yvette's guest bed. Yvette came home an hour later and found me pacing. She listened, then said I needed one night in my life that was not about Damon Fletcher. So she marched me into the shower, made me put on the maroon dress Damon always said was too bold for me, and took me to an upscale bistro downtown. We talked about her caseload, a terrible first date, the playlist the restaurant was ruining with bad jazz covers. I laughed hard enough to surprise myself. On our way out, we ran into Trevor and his wife, Angela. Houston is a big city with a small professional core. Trevor asked whether we would mind sitting for one drink. Angela squeezed my hand and said she was sorry for what I was enduring. Trevor was more formal. He said the board had issued Damon a temporary suspension pending internal review and that he wanted me to hear it directly, not through gossip. He also told me my ownership stake had grown far beyond what Damon ever admitted. Because of my original trust investment and the company's appreciation, I was no longer a minor courtesy investor. I had leverage. I sat there with a glass of sparkling water and realized Damon had been standing on foundations I helped pour while telling himself I was small. Trial preparation sharpened everything. Diane trimmed duplication from our witness list because she hated wasted motion. Howard would establish the final numbers. Trevor would explain the company relationship, my investment, and the governance consequences. Patricia would testify about Damon's long-standing attachment to Simone. Nicole would testify to one specific incident in which Damon asked her to lie for him. Cedric would authenticate the surveillance photos and property records. Simone would be subpoenaed because too much money had flowed directly to her for her role to stay off stage. The final forensic report landed 3 days before the evidentiary hearing. The total dissipation number was $637,000. Howard walked me through it line by line, so I would not freeze if Gerald tried to suggest the amount had been inflated for drama. $402,000 represented direct cash transfers, rent support, debt payments, and easily categorized expenditures. The remaining amount included the condo down payment, furniture, car obligations, travel, jewelry, and other traced benefits paid with marital or commingled funds. Diane also added a claim for reimbursement tied to the education savings Damon had drained and for confirmation that my remaining trust assets were separate property. She did not ask for vague emotional distress damages because she respected reality too much to weaken a strong case with a sloppy one. The day before court, Patricia met me for coffee in the Galleria area. She looked tired. She said Damon had come to her house asking for help, not with remorse, but with strategy. He wanted her to persuade me to settle cheap and quietly. Instead, she told him she would testify truthfully if asked. Nicole was the same. When Diane prepped her, she admitted she covered once early on and regretted it. That regret made her credible. No one in my orbit was a cardboard hero. We were all people who had been dragged into Damon's selfishness in different ways. The night before the hearing, I barely slept, not because I was afraid of losing, but because I knew I would have to hear my marriage translated into exhibits and testimony. The evidentiary hearing lasted less than a day and felt longer than most years of my marriage. Howard testified first and did exactly what he was there to do. He broke the money down cleanly, distinguished preliminary figures from final ones, and explained the tracing method so clearly that even Gerald's cross-examination sounded thin. Cedric followed with surveillance photographs, timestamp authentication, and the property record trail for the condo. Trevor testified next. He explained that I had invested $200,000 from my trust into Fletcher Technologies over several years, that my investment had been formally recorded, and that I had occasionally assisted with strategic review during the company's early fundraising phase. He also confirmed that clients and investors expressed concern once Damon's conduct became known in business circles, leading to internal review and a board vote to remove him from operational control. Patricia was next. She said Damon had spoken about Simone on and off throughout the marriage, and that she had warned him more than once that if he still loved another woman, he had no business remaining married to me while acting on it in secret. Nicole added one precise memory. A family cookout where Damon slipped away, took a call, and later asked her to tell me he had been at a supplier meeting if I called looking for him. She refused, and they did not speak for months after that. Simone arrived in a navy suit and the expression of a woman who had not expected private choices to become public consequences. Diane asked her simple questions. Yes, she had been in a relationship with Damon for about 3 years. Yes, she knew he was married the entire time. Yes, he had paid her rent, covered debts, purchased jewelry, and arranged the condo. Diane never had to call her names. The numbers did that work by themselves. The hardest part came when Diane played the saved call and introduced the email about my tuition account. Then Damon took the stand against Gerald's advice. That decision was pure Damon, the belief that charm could still rescue him if he got close enough to the facts. Diane asked Damon whether he loved me when he married me. He said he cared for me deeply. She asked whether he loved Simone too. He said it was complicated. She asked whether the sentence, "Taryn keeps everything stable," was taken out of context or accurately reflected how he viewed the woman whose money, labor, and reputation had supported him. He had no good answer. She asked whether he emptied the education account, knowing I planned to return to school. He said he meant to replace it. She asked when. He had no date. She asked whether he intended to leave me after his stock options vested. He tried to soften it by saying he was sorting his feelings. Then she read his own words back to him. "Once my options vest, I'm done pretending." There is a strange stillness that enters a room when a liar hears himself quoted accurately. I felt it then. When I testified, Gerald tried to paint me as calculating because I did not confront Damon the moment I suspected the affair. I answered with the truth. I said I had not documented his conduct because I was cold. I documented it because I knew he had already decided my trust made me safe to exploit. I said marriage is supposed to be partnership, not a shell game where one spouse funds another's second life. My voice shook only once, when Diane asked what losing the tuition account meant. I told the court it meant discovering that while I was waiting to reclaim my own future, Damon was using it to decorate someone else's. Judge Whitfield issued her ruling a week later, and because she was a serious judge, she ruled like one. She confirmed my remaining trust assets as separate property. She found significant dissipation of marital assets by Damon and ordered the $637,000 charged against his share of the marital estate. She awarded me the marital home as my sole property, offset by Damon's dissipation, a larger share of the remaining liquid assets, reimbursement tied to the education account he had drained, and several family pieces Damon had no credible claim to. She did not give me everything Diane asked for, and that was part of why I respected the result. The ruling was strong because it was grounded. The legal decree finalized 2 months later after the remaining title transfers and company matters were completed. Damon's board buyout happened on a separate track with separate counsel. He did not lose the company overnight in one heroic blow. He lost operational control after the board review, then negotiated a fair market buyout reduced by liabilities and restrictions he had once signed without imagining they would ever apply to him. Trevor later told me the investors insisted on rebranding. Fletcher Technologies became Meridian Tech. He asked whether I wanted to retain my equity stake under the new structure or cash out entirely. I chose to stay in. I had helped build value there, and for the first time I was willing to benefit openly from work I had long been expected to treat as invisible support. Trevor also asked whether I would consider an advisory seat once the dust settled. That offer did not come from nowhere. He had seen my early strategic input, and after discovery he saw exactly how carefully I had documented complex financial conduct. Reclaiming the house took longer emotionally than it did legally. I repainted the bedroom first, then the office, then the dining room. I brought my grandmother's furniture back in. I turned the spare bedroom into a studio instead of a nursery for a future Damon had always insisted needed better timing. Patricia stopped by with a casserole and another apology. I told her the apology was no longer the important part. The important part was that she had told the truth when it counted. That was when she told me Simone had left Damon before the company buyout was even complete. Not because Patricia had secret gossip, but because Damon himself had admitted it in the course of begging for sympathy. Once the money was tied up and the condo became part of the financial reckoning, Simone moved on to a developer she had met at an open house event. I expected the news to taste sweet. It did not. It just tasted final. I filed the name change paperwork the same week the final decree was entered. The first time I saw Taryn Green typed on an official order, I had to sit down. Fletcher had been my name for so long that I did not realize how much it still held until I let it go. That fall I enrolled in a master's program at Rice, using a mix of reimbursement money, my own salary, and a stubbornness Damon never fully appreciated. I accepted the advisory seat at Meridian Tech on a limited basis after 3 months of saying no until Trevor finally asked the correct question. Not whether I wanted to help the company, but whether I was willing to let myself be seen as capable in rooms where I had once hidden behind Damon's title. So I said yes. Not because I wanted to stay connected to Damon's old world, but because I was tired of walking away from rooms I had every right to enter. Yvette celebrated by dragging me to dinner and making me toast to audacity. I started painting again too, badly at first. My early canvases were all fury and fractured color. Then something loosened. I painted the sun room I planned to build. I painted my grandmother's hands. I painted a woman standing at a window with 3 suitcases behind her and no one beside her. Some nights I worked on case notes for school until midnight and then painted until 2. I was exhausted often, but for the first time in years exhaustion felt like proof of my own life rather than service to someone else's. Damon tried to reach out only once after the final decree, through a letter Gerald forwarded as a professional courtesy. I did not read past the first paragraph. There are apologies that arrive too late to function as anything but self-comfort. The only thing I wanted from Damon by then was compliance with the judgment. When he later tried to renegotiate the payment schedule tied to the asset equalization, Diane handled it and the court denied the modification. That was the last meaningful consequence he tried to escape and failed to. I met James Walker 4 months after the divorce at a fundraiser for a neighborhood arts program. He was not a polished fantasy dropped into the perfect chapter break. He was 38, taught art at a public high school in 3rd Ward, showed up 10 minutes late because he had stayed after with a student finishing a scholarship portfolio and spilled sparkling water on his own cuff while trying to apologize. I liked him almost immediately because he did not treat me like a cautionary tale or a comeback story. He asked about a painting I donated to the auction and listened to the answer without turning it into flirtation. We moved slowly. He told me about the ways divorce had made him wary of conflict and how teaching teenagers had made him patient in places he never expected. I told him there were still nights when I heard a phone buzz and felt my stomach tense before my mind caught up. He never rushed to fix that. He just made room for it. The first time he came to my house, he stood in the studio doorway looking at a half-finished canvas and asked whether I wanted feedback or silence. That small question told me more about his character than any practice speech could have. I learned later from Patricia that Damon saw us once from the street while driving past the house. She only mentioned it because he confessed it to her in one of his rare honest moments, and said that seeing me laugh in my own yard hurt worse than the ruling. I did not feel guilty about that either. He had once believed my steadiness was proof I would survive whatever he did. In the end, he was right about the survival and wrong about what it would cost him. By the time a year had passed, my life was full in ways I could not have imagined on the night of the suitcases. But it was not cartoon perfect. Graduate school was brutal. Advisory board work demanded more of me than I expected. Some mornings I still woke from dreams where Damon was in the next room and had to remind myself the danger had already happened and ended. Healing was not a straight staircase. It was a series of returns to myself. 18 months after the divorce, I stood on a small stage at that same arts program's annual fundraiser. I was there because one of my paintings had sold well enough the year before that the director asked me to say a few words about why I kept supporting them. My name on the program read Taryn Green. That mattered. So did the fact that I wore the red dress Damon once called too much and felt perfectly at ease in it. I looked out over the room and saw Yvette near the back, Trevor beside Angela, Patricia and Nicole at a table together, and James leaning against the side wall with his jacket slung over one shoulder. I also saw Damon for one brief second near the last row. He must have come because the event was public and Meridian had sponsored a student scholarship under its new name. He looked older and quieter. I did not hate him. I simply no longer belonged to the life where his choices defined my size. When I spoke, I did not tell the room about betrayal in dramatic language. I said I had learned that art gives shape to things people survive before they have words for them. I said rebuilding a life is less about one triumphant moment than about choosing yourself over and over until it becomes natural. When the applause ended, I stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward James. Damon was somewhere behind me, but for once the past stayed where it belonged. James took my hand, looked at me like I was fully there, and asked if I was ready to go home. I was. That was the whole victory. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.